Good morning, and thank you for waiting. The panel has always been a tradition since the very first Preservation Festival 4 years ago, and we love it. We also love its informality. And so it will just as informal. We have 4 extraordinary guests. Cassandra Moore, who is in charge of restoration for NBCUniversal. David Schwartz, who will represent the Filmmakers Cooperative, is a curator and a writer. And our own Joe Lauro of the historic Film Archive that has uncovered something extraordinary. And Alan Berliner, the artist who is responsible for the beautiful exhibit upstairs. So they will take turns with their presentation, and then once they're all done, we'll take questions and for a little bit, and then we'll go upstairs and have brunch. So enjoy the panel, and I'm going to call to the podium Cassandra Moore.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So nice to see everybody here. And we're going to get going here. I have a PowerPoint to go through. The other presentations are a little more creative, but I have to stay on structure, stay on point. And I want to try and touch some points about restoration and preservation. This is a festival of preservation, but I want to talk about how it combines for us at NBCUniversal, because I think it's really important, the work that many of the people in the audience are doing and how we put together the Lance cartoons that were shown yesterday morning. Some of you were there, and got a lot of good feedback. They're really fun. But I want to kind of talk about how we put that together and how we really try to think creatively at NBCUniversal to preserve, because believe it or not, just because we're at a big movie studio doesn't mean we have unlimited funds to do whatever we want. And so we have to be really creative about how we do these things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of restoration and preservation at NBCUniversal and just kind of kick it off. And I oversee mastering an archive, and I like to think of that as everything from the beginning of when a post team turns over to us to where we put the archive to sleep and let those elements rest and take good care of them. So we're going to kick it off here. All right, so Universal, you probably think of the monsters, you probably think of, maybe you do, I think of, Dracula, Frankenstein, all of those wonderful monsters. And we have a restoration program that started in 2012. We've restored about 150 features. We're very proud of all of those restorations. It started during our centennial when we turned 100, and there was an initiative from our home entertainment and our film group to put out a series of DVDs and Blu-rays to celebrate the centennial. So a big list was put together, and that was put out, and it was extremely, extremely successful. We've also restored, this year marks our 25th silent, and I think that's very important because the silents are so critical to the history of filmmaking. We saw a beautiful silent yesterday that MoMA did. My friend Dave Kerr put together, beautiful, called The Wind. It was extraordinary. And so the silent air is very important. Very difficult to do those films, just so you guys know in the audience who aren't professionals, it's very, very difficult to do those. So, all right, moving on to kind of talk about the history. So 2012, our centennial. 2013, we'd started in 2K. 2013, we realized very quickly we needed to move to 4K. That's kind of the standard now. There are some 6K restorations that are done as well, depending on the title. In 2015, we partnered with the Film Foundation. The Film Foundation wrote, Mr. Martin Scorsese, you might have heard of him, Mr. Steven Spielberg wrote a letter to the then chairman of Universal Pictures and said, would you restore this film called One-Eyed Jacks? And really extraordinary restoration project that we undertook with the Film Foundation. We still partner with the Film Foundation to this day. They're extraordinary partners, and current day, what are we in, 2024? We just finalized our list for 2025, so we're very excited to be funded going into 2025 for our restoration initiative. All right. So a little bit, since this is preservation, I want to talk a little bit about the history of what Universal has done to preserve its archive, its library. In the 1950s, we started with geographical separation of elements, meaning we have one copy on the West Coast and one copy on the East Coast, very, very simply put. In the 70s, we really started to manufacture photochemical preservation. A lot of elements were created during that time to make sure that we were continuing to preserve our archive, our library. And then, as I mentioned, we had the centennial. In about 2017, we migrated to digital. So at this point, we do not do photochemical preservation anymore, but we do a very active digital restoration program. And to this day, I'm going to look at the numbers because I don't want to get it wrong. We've done 130, we did 137 film preservations this year alone. We're on track to do about 150 next year. And it's very simply making sure we've scanned our negative, making sure we've captured our audio, and that we can make sure that we have copies of both of those digitally. We're also migrating our LTO library. And I know that gets really technical, but a lot of movie studios have a lot of LTOs, and those are data tapes. So we want to make sure that we have those in the cloud. And we are on track to continue this into 2025. So what is the future of restoration? We're funded for next year. We're super excited. We're also funded for preservation. And I think the point that I want to make with all of this before we start talking about the Lance cartoons is how much Universal Pictures cares about archives and library and content. It's very, very important. And so we have a wonderful partnership with our film studio to fund this work. Our CFO is an amazing, amazing man who believes in this work, understands the importance of it. We love him because he's the one who basically funds what we do, and he's an incredible partner in this work. Universal is very committed to this work, so we're very excited. I'm very excited to be there every day, but we're very excited that we can do what we do. So preservation, high level, what is preservation? So there's a lot of research that goes into preserving film titles. And there's a lot of consideration. I have an incredible staff of researchers and archivists and film handlers and people who are influencing the lists that we put together to do this work. So, we have to come up with what are the titles. We're looking for really the oldest, most fragile to start with. That's important because we understand that there is deterioration in physical film. So we try to target the oldest, but there's a balancing act because some of the elements that we have are called nitrate film elements, and you can't have a whole bunch of nitrates in one place at one time. They're very flammable. So we have a lot of coordination that goes into doing that many films every year. We come up with our budget, of course, because, you have to have a budget to do these things, and we're collaborating. I mean, I'm always talking. There's many people in this room that I'm talking to. What should we be working on? What do you think? As well as, the people on my team. But this is a very collaborative environment that we're all working in because, I don't know everything. My God, how could I, right? So we're always trying to talk to people to understand what's going on, to understand what's important. There are many, many experts in the world about, who know a lot about film and silent movies. And so it's a very collaborative environment, which I think is important. We're looking to also migrate obsolete formats. So obsolete formats are what I would call things that we're not going to be able to play back forever. And it's important because there was also a lot of videotape and a lot of tape formats that were created over the history of media. And so we are also looking at those and focusing on those, not just film, but obsolete formats as well. And then we digitize. And then in some opportunities, I was talking to someone earlier, we did a series of musical shorts this year where we collaborated with an outside archive, and we were able to digitize a group of digital musical shorts that we played at a festival recently. So just another example of collaboration. And then I'm going to show a quick picture here of our Universal Vault and Universal Studios, in fact. If you look down in the bottom, the bottom left corner, this one right here, that's our current archive collection building, numerous buildings where we're storing our negative. The top right corner is the original nitrate vault. And I think that's such a cool picture because they were shooting silent movies outside of this building. And that second tier is where people could go buy chicken, go to the top, and watch the silent movies being filmed. So that building is still in existence. We don't store film in there anymore. It's too old. It's mostly used for storage, but I think that's kind of a fun fact. And then just some little pictures of what the studio lot looks like. So a little bit of background. Restoration, preservation, they go hand in hand. For us, it's a combined effort. We're looking at both. And sometimes during our preservation efforts, we find, oh my gosh, there's this amazing film and we should restore it, right? So kind of hand in hand for us. So now I'm going to talk about what we're here to talk about, Lance cartoons a little bit, very specifically. So we had an opportunity last year. There was one of our divisions who sells content came to us and said, we have a list of the Lance cartoons and we'd like to put them out. We'd like to sell them to a licensee. And so we started to look, and their needs were, we really just want a small file, an HD file that we can send out and it can be broadcast. And so we said, ooh, maybe this is our opportunity, right? Creative thinking, to preserve these elements as well. And so when we started to do research, we realized that they were this really, really unique thing. And I have one gentleman on my team who has been there for a really long time. I have a lot of really people who've been there for a really long time. And he had a list of all of the negative elements. And not only that, but that they were successive exposure negatives, which is very unique. And so we were like, ooh, this is getting really interesting. How are we going to put this together? And we thought, oh my gosh, we have to scan these negatives. We can't, we don't want to scan a print. We don't want to scan an IP. And we really want to scan the negatives, because if we're going to touch the material, let's make sure we've preserved it. So we not only fulfill the sale that we've got, but we've also done something really amazing for the archive. So as we were looking at it, we realized there were 139 cartoons that they wanted. They didn't want all of them. They only wanted 139. So we realized, all right, let's put this together. Let's figure out how to do this workflow. We'll scan all of these at high resolution, make sure we've got them for the archive. And then in our phase 2, which we're in now, we can go ahead and continue to scan the rest of them. So, creative thinking, I think, is always important in any archive, especially when it comes to a budget. And I'm going to try and go quick because I know I'm going a little long. What is a successive exposure negative? So successive exposure on one piece of film, 3 images, one after another. And I'm going to go ahead and go to this little demo here so you can see what it looks like.
Guess who?
So successive exposure, one after another, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, on one piece of film is a very brilliant way to do that. There's a lot of conversation about how that. Sorry about that. Went the wrong way. There's a lot of conversation about how that was developed, and there's a high probability that Walt Disney might have developed it. Now, Walt and Walter Lantz were hanging out together, right? And so, there may be some debate. I'm not going to get into the debate, but about how that came about. Maybe it was collaboration. We're going to go with that. So, so I talked a little bit about the negatives. So we had a few of those negatives that were nitrate originals, very, very old film. We scan those at our on-lot facility, NBCUniversal. We do most of our work at NBCUniversal Studio Post. But like I said, there's management to nitrate elements, so you have to be careful about, how many you can have on a lot at any given time, and it's based on poundage and so on and so forth. And then the rest of the work was done at a facility called Illuminate. that's in Los Angeles, and they basically scanned most of the other negatives, recombined the frames, the RGB frames, did the hand restoration of the cartoons, and then finally conformed the audio to the picture so that they went together. We did these scans as 4K. I think that's important to note because even though, you know, they're cartoon, they're still part of our history, part of our legacy. And then we decided that we wanted to do these in Dolby Vision. So the interesting thing about that is that if you create a Dolby Vision master, you have a single source master, and from that master, you can derive what everybody needs. So that's what we did, which is kind of fun. All right, that's okay. And then the audio. Never want to forget about the audio, right? So we had a lot of different sources. Cartoons go into syndication, which is, you know, part of the way that they're sold. So we had a lot of different sources to go through and figure out what we had and what we wanted to scan and preserve. So we digitized them, very high resolution, 96K. And we went through, there's this wonderful, you know, there's a lot of tools that you can use. So we try to use the tools as effectively as we can in order to clean up the bumps and the scratches and the, you know, all of the noise, the kind of, there's a lot of hiss in these old elements. So we did that as well. And it was really a wonderful program. So what happened was the sale happened, right? We did all of this digitization. We did all of this restoration, all of this cleanup. We now have 96 of them, I think it is, that are in this very, very high quality format. We use those masters to make the DCP that showed yesterday. Really fun. There were a couple of little kids in the audience, and oh my gosh, it was so cute to hear them. They were like guffawing and laughing, and you know, that to me is like when an audience sees, you know, what has happened. That's what's really amazing. So to hear those little kids' laughter was extraordinary. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm going so fast, sorry. I'm going to end this with a little before and after so that you all can see what the results were, and I hope you enjoy it. And thank you so much for having me here today.
SRP Cosmo Clonk.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. And the cartoons are now shown upstairs. We did a second program, and we're going to bring more later in the year for our kids and family thing. They're extraordinary, and the color and the work on the preservation is incredible. So I've always wanted to introduce avant-garde, or what Ernie Gear calls the other cinema at Sag Harbor, and the Festival of Preservation seemed like a good environment for it. So our next guest, David Schwartz, will join me, and we'll talk about the Filmmakers Cooperative, which is one of the institutions that most has worked to preserve and foster the experimental and avant-garde cinema. David Schwartz.
Thanks. Hi. Following this incredibly professional PowerPoint. I don't have a PowerPoint. I do have an animated film to show. We're going to watch a little avant-garde cartoon in a few minutes. But I want to, I'm so glad to be part of this festival. It's really an extraordinary array of films and variety, and today is incredible. I mean, to have the two great Hollywood studio films, Gunman's Walk and Leave Her to Heaven. The Ernie Gare program is amazing, and then the home movie program that MoMA's going to present. So I really appreciate the variety of films that are shown here. So congratulations to Julia and the team here. And the archives, so the archives that we're dealing with in this panel are get successively smaller with each guest. So we go from NBCUniversal. I'm going to talk about a small organization, relatively small, in Manhattan called the Filmmakers Cooperative, and then we have basically individual archives that you're going to hear from next. So what is the Filmmakers Cooperative? Some of you might be wondering. It was an organization that was founded in 1961. It's now a nonprofit. It still exists and still operating. But when it was founded, it was actually a for-profit entity that came about in 1961 at a time when there was a lot of experimentation and a lot of excitement and innovation in cinema all around the world. In New York City, there was a venue that started in the late 1940s, I believe, called Cinema 16. That was founded by Amos Vogel and became like the probably best known showcase for avant-garde film in New York. But as more and more filmmakers started emerging in this underground scene, there was a desire to have something else, an alternative to Cinema 16. So a group of filmmakers got together in 1961, led by Jonas Mekas, who wore many hats in the avant-garde world. He was at the time a film critic and columnist for the Village Voice. He wrote about film, and he was sort of a champion for all these emerging avant-garde films that were coming out. So he joined with a number of filmmakers, including Shirley Clarke, Ken and Flo Jacobs, Andy Warhol, whose films were originally distributed by the Filmmakers Co-op, and Jack Smith. And they formed what was called the New American Cinema Group. And they formed this organization whose main goal was to distribute films. It was basically to get films out to film societies and colleges, all these, what would today be called micro-cinemas, but all these small cinemas that were emerging all around the country. And so they formed this entity. And it was one reason that they formed it was they wanted to not have Amos Vogel, who was the director of Cinema 16, be the one person who was making decisions about what films were and were not shown. So there was an incident which was sort of famous in the avant-garde world, a movie by Stan Brakhage called Anticipation of the Night, which was a really important early avant-garde film. And Amos Vogel didn't like the film and didn't want to show it at Cinema 16. And so Jonas Mekas and others felt like, who is this one guy? Why is he allowed to decide what gets shown and what's not? So one of the sort of ways that the Filmmakers Cooperative was set up was that anybody who had a film and wanted it to be distributed could put their film in the co-op and the film would be distributed. There wasn't a selection process. And the filmmakers would get half of the money and the co-op would get the other half. So that's how it was set up. Over the years, it grew. It grew. Jonas Mekas really helped help bring attention to the underground at a time when there were all these other new waves emerging around the world. There was a new wave in France, the free cinema movement in England, and so now these avant-garde films were being shown all around the world. So over the years, the mission expanded for the co-op. It eventually did become a nonprofit organization, and in addition to distribution, it was also involved in workshops for filmmakers and seminars, publications, and then they started distributing video and then ultimately digital media. But what really happened is the co-op became like a de facto archive. It wasn't originally intended to be an archive, but all these filmmakers had deposited their films there. And in many cases, the co-op was the only source for these very important films. So by some of the filmmakers who became very famous, like Ernie Gare, who's with us today, and Stan Brakhage and Ken Jacobs, but also a lot of lesser-known filmmakers. So even though it wasn't meant to be an archive, it became one. And so anybody who's been to the Filmmakers Co-op, which is now in Manhattan on Park Avenue and 32nd Street, there's a room that has just shelves filled with 16mm prints and digital files, but old film, sort of rusting old film cans that are being preserved as best as possible. And these are incredibly valuable. I mean, these are in some cases unique prints, beautiful. Not all the prints are pristine. So you will find like beautiful, pristine Kodachrome prints, also some films that have a lot of wear and tear and need to be preserved. So now the co-op is essentially a sort of museum in a way and an archive, as well as also being an ongoing distribution effort. So filmmakers are still depositing films. New filmmakers are putting their films in the co-op and getting them distributed that way. The organization has faced extinction threats. I mean, it's not an incredibly, well-funded operation, but it has been able to maintain itself. It found a space at the Clock Tower Gallery downtown back, I guess around 2000 or so. It moved there, or maybe a little bit earlier, but had to leave. It was a nonprofit organization, and basically they decided they didn't have room anymore for the co-op. So there was this brief period when it looked like the co-op was going to be without a home. And then Charles Cohn, the realtor, the New York realtor, who runs the Cohn Film distribution efforts, heard about this story. There was a story in the New York Times about the co-op facing eviction, and he offered them office space, basically, in one of his sort of modern office buildings on Park Avenue. So the co-op has been sort of hanging on thanks to that generosity. And last year, a new executive director joined the co-op named Tom Day, who came over here from London. And he's really been extraordinary in terms of expanding what the co-op is doing. So there are a lot of screenings. If you look at the Filmmakers Co-op website, you'll see that there's a lot of programs that happen at the co-op. There's a 20-seat screening room, and programs are happening there all the time. And there's a lot of new publication that's been coming out, and preservation and restoration efforts for films. And that's what I'm going to be showing you right now. But right now there are over 6,000 films in the co-op by 2,500 different artists. So there's a lot to explore. And so one of the things that Tom is doing and the team at the co-op is doing is trying to look for some of the neglected filmmakers. There's been, I've been programming some of the filmmakers who didn't receive the attention that some of the more famous names I mentioned talked of. And a lot of times it is, not surprisingly, women and filmmakers of color who had work at the co-op that just hasn't been seen. So that's now coming out. Now, those films are now being shown. So I will mention that Alan Berliner, who did the amazing exhibition upstairs, has, I believe, 9 films at the co-op now, work that he did between 1975 and 1996. So he's just one of the many, many artists whose work is available through the co-op. So what I'm going to show you, I wanted to show a work that has been restored. I mean, a lot of what the co-op has been doing is just preservation, just trying to keep everything it has in good shape and transfer the films to digital. There's a lot of college film societies now and classes that can't even show 16mm prints anymore. So the only way to show a lot of these films is to show them digitally. So the movie that we're going to see is called Skullduggery, and it's an animated film by an artist named Stan Vanderbeek, who was a very interesting artist who was sort of loved technology and experimented with technology throughout his career. He was born in 1932. The film we're going to see is from 1960, so he was just about, 28 years old when he made this movie. He started his career working in an animation studio. He actually worked on the TV show Winky Dink and You, which I guess a lot of us here are old enough to remember that show. I mean, one funny thing about it was an early form of interactive video, because I think if you remember the show, you would put a piece of acetate on top of your TV screen, and then you could draw with crayon on the screen. So sounds like a lot of people remember that. So he within about 6 months he was fired from his job there. And but what he decided to do was just go back to the studio at nights, and he would sort of talk his way in and just told the night watchman that he was just doing some work, and he would work on the animation stand. And so he was just sort of hanging out there for a while, making his own animation, unknown to anybody else, but became an artist. He went on to work in be sort of a pioneer in computer animation. He also was very into the idea of expanded cinema, so cinema that was not just within the confines of a small screening room. He created these big domes that where films could be projected all over the inside of a dome. So he was always trying to invent new forms of cinema. But what we're going to see right now, his early films were collage films, and he would cut out pictures from magazines and drawings. And when you see this film, you might first associate the style with the films that Terry Gilliam did for Monty Python. This actually came before that. And one of the techniques that he used was he found a way to combine live action archival footage with collage animation. So you'll notice, I mean, that's an unusual thing about this film, that you'll see like actually moving images, old black and white film, and then he found a way to like combine like his paper cutouts. So this film that you're going to see was a restoration effort. It's a 5-minute film. It's one of many films that Vanderbeek made, and it was restored through funding from the Stan Vanderbeek Archive, from the Film Foundation. Again, one of the great things about Martin Scorsese is that he really has supported the restoration of a lot of avant-garde films. He himself, when he was in New York in the 60s, spent a lot of time going to see avant-garde films. And he's talked about that a lot. A big influence on Mean Streets was the Kenneth Anger film Scorpio Rising. That's just one example. But he really drew a lot of his understanding of film technique from watching avant-garde films. So he was involved in restoring this film, and I believe the Academy of Film Archive too was involved in this. So it's 5 minutes long. Enjoy it, and thank you so much.
Hello? 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 Digging trenches and trying on gas masks here. Because of a far away country. If I know any survival of Christian civilization. States and the Japanese Empire. Für all die Bemühungen. Ich habe ihm versichert,
Thank you, David. And now I'm going to call Joe Lauro. Speaking of personal archives, and every year a new surprise, if not more than one. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks. There's a light here. Hello, folks. I am delighted to be part of this amazing festival, and I am also delighted to be living right down the block. It's really nice. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you much about historic films, but we are a stock footage library, independent. We supply archival footage and musical-related content to people doing other films. And I began the library, you know, by finding films in so many different ways. And back in the day, it was all about 16 millimeter. Now, when 16 millimeter was developed around 1923, it just revolutionized and gave so many more outlets for film, because 35 millimeter nitrate was difficult to project. You needed different equipment. 16 millimeter made it more manageable, and a whole market of non-theatrical films really exploded. Libraries, prisons, colleges, and lots of universities, till about 15 years ago, had their own libraries of 16 millimeter films. They'd show them in the classrooms. So one of the things we did is we'd contact the universities and say, do you have any films you want to get rid of that no one's watching anymore? And they were delighted to send us boxes of film. And then really about 15 years ago, we got a call from, I believe it was Kent State, and they said, we will deliver the entire archive to you if you want it. We said, sure. Why not, right? I mean, because no one was watching films in the classroom anymore, and the films were sitting there being unused and collecting dust. So we received this archive in boxes, put it in storage, and largely because we're a small archive, didn't really do that much with it. We pulled things when we could. This summer, we had a young intern who was a film preservation student in Toronto named Dan Martin. And I said, Dan, I tell you what, go into the basement and start cataloging what we have down there. We've had this stuff for years. We don't know what some of it is. So didn't see him for days. He was in the basement making lists, and he came up with the startled look on his face, holding a bunch of cans. This is one of them. And he said, Joe, I really think this might be something unusual, extraordinary. I go, what do you mean? He goes, it says the heart of Lincoln. And I've researched it, and it might be this film made in 1915 by John Ford's brother, Francis Ford. I go, well, okay, your assignment, go figure out what it is. Next day he comes back, even more startled look on his face. It's a lost film. And Francis Ford did, in fact, make this film. And he found original reviews for it. And we had all 5 cans. And we researched it. And apparently Ford, who was an inspiration to his brother, they worked together. In fact, Francis Ford specialized in portraying Abraham Lincoln, which he did in 7 films, all of which are lost except for one that was found in New Hampshire about 10 years ago in a barn, a nitrate print. But we had the 16 millimeter print, and we were trying to figure out, is this really it? Because the thing was, it had an introduction to it of a young soldier coming back from World War II, which ended in 1918. So it didn't make sense because the original one was made in 1915. We found out that Ford recut it in 1922. He added his son in a prologue. And the whole film really is about Francis Ford's obsession, I would say almost, with Lincoln as a benevolent man, almost like a Christ-like figure, the way he's portrayed in this film. So it's a typical sort of Victorian sentimental drama staged during the Civil War, with it all revolving around Lincoln and certain things in Lincoln's life. But the story is really about what happens in war, especially if it's a civil war where families and friends are torn apart. So there's a young boy and his girlfriend. He's from the North, she's from the South. He's best friends with the girl's brother, but war is declared. So she has to go back down south. They're afraid of what might happen if they stay. So they depart. And throughout the film, it's a melodrama. He gets captured visiting his dying mother, and, all this stuff happens. But it's all cross-cut with all these different things that happen with Lincoln during the Civil War. And I'm going to show you 4, we don't have that much time, but I'm going to show you 4 brief excerpts. This is not glorious 35 millimeter like The Wind, which I couldn't leave my seat after seeing that yesterday. One of the most gorgeous films. It's 16 millimeter. Our technician, Elia Kisilov, did a 4K transfer. It's not restored, it's preserved. We got the original, we cleaned it up, took it out of the rusty old cans, and archived it. The first scene will give you an example of Francis Ford's portrayal of Lincoln. He looked nothing like Lincoln. He was short and stocky, but no one was really paying much attention. It was in his heart, for sure. I'll show you a brief excerpt. It's actually the moment when Lincoln signs the Declaration of War, and it's a very solemn little 20 seconds. The next little section is really the love story. It's this part, I think it's absolutely beautiful. It's the young boy and his girlfriend who just realize that they have to be separated. And, you know, it's just a typical sort of Victorian sentiment. Sentimentality was very big back in the day. I don't know why we've gotten away from it. It's like a bad word these days. But strong sentiment was in so many of these films. It just tugs at you. And this is just a really lovely little 2-minute bit of that moment when the lovers have to part because of the war. Ford's partner, Grace Kennard, was the writer of the original 1915 film and actually had a part in it. I can't identify her because clearly this 1922 version was cut from the original. The original was 3 reels, which would have been about 30 minutes. This one is 5 reels, which is about 50. So he added different things. And you could tell by fashions and things like that, you know, some of what was original and what he added later. This next little bit is part of the benevolence of Lincoln, where that very soldier now in war, he gets a note, oh no, he has a dream, and he sees like a vision of his mother, and in fact, she's dying. But he has this premonition. And so he needs to go across the lines to see her and before she dies, which he does. But he's captured by his girlfriend's brother. And the whole bit that you're going to see is Lincoln is given a request by his general saying, we have to be tough on any of these soldiers that are going AWOL, and we have to set an example. So he's asked to sign a declaration well, they were going to shoot him at a firing squad, right? So it was basically a proclamation of allowing this soldier to be executed because of his desertion. And Lincoln is totally troubled. He doesn't want to do it. But finally, he kind of gives in to the pressure, and he's about to sign it. But there's a little disruption caused by his son, Todd Lincoln. We'll show you this little scene. He was looking for any excuse not to sign this declaration. He had his excuse. Tomato goes a long way in the face, right? The next little bit and the final excerpt is really the surrender of Lee to Grant at Appomattox, Virginia. It's probably the biggest production scene, you know, with a cast of hundreds maybe, or at least 50 in the film, which ends the Civil War. And it's shortly after Lincoln's death. No, actually, no, it's right before it. We never get into that in the film, curiously. It really just covers the Civil War era, and it ends over there. But this is about the end of the film, pretty much the climax of the film. Thank you very much. Briefly, I just want to say that the beautiful thing about all of this is, even though this is 110, 15 years ago, things are still being found. We found this 2 months ago, okay? And, you know, things turn up. I mean, you hear that something like 80% of all silent films are gone forever. Well, we're hoping that maybe another 10% will resurface, and I think they will. Just got to keep looking. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Joe. And here I'm calling Alan Berliner, who is a filmmaker in his own right, and marvelous documentaries, and also the artist of all the pieces in the third floor exhibit, which I suggest you to see and tell your friends, because we're going to have it until the end of January. So, Alan, please join.
Thank you all for being here. Again, I want to thank you, Julia, for allowing me to share my work and show my work at the Sag Harbor Cinema and include me in the festival. When I first saw the program at the festival, I was pleased and shocked by how many points of connection I have with some of the institutions and people and themes of the festival. For one, back in the mid-1970s, I was a student at the State University of New York at Binghamton, which at the time had one of the most important, perhaps the most important, experimental and avant-garde cinema program in the world. And Ernie Gare, who's sitting there in row 3, was one of the teachers there, and I'm proud to say I was once one of Ernie's students. And I've studied his films over the years, I've taught his films over the years, which continue to amaze and inspire me, and I very much look forward, as we all should, to Ernie's program later this afternoon. So, 2. Several of my films are in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. All the masters of my films are in the Museum of Modern Art, and I know that there's going to be a presentation about home movies this afternoon by Katie and Ron, rather. And it reminded me that I made a film back in 1986 composed entirely of anonymous, 16mm anonymous family home movies from the 1920s through the 40s called The Family Album. And so I look forward to seeing that program too this afternoon after the brunch. When I saw that Katie and Ron's program was including home movies by including, or that it contained images and of various poets, celebrated poets, artists, celebrities, and what have you, it reminded me also that back in the mid-90s, I was asked by Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward to make a film for them, a private film, out of their family home movies. And I have to say, well, when you have home movies with Paul and Joanne and some of their friends like Gore Vidal and Roddy McDowell and Laurence Olivier, I'm not sure you call them home movies, but, and all I can say is that it took several years, and I worked with them very intimately, and it was one of the most great joys of my life doing that. It's a 2-hour film, private, not for public. Yeah. Fourth is, as David mentioned, my films are in the collection of the Filmmakers Cooperative, so I have a deep connection, long-standing, since the early 1980s with the co-op, and thank David for reminding us how important the co-op is for many filmmakers to the community, to the filmmaking community, and I think under the new leadership of Tom Day, the co-op is poised to expand its horizons in a lot of new and important ways. If you can, Sarah, put up the first photograph. Yeah. This is a picture of my studio on a good day, or what it looked like 20 years ago or so. Robert Schneider, who is the film distribution manager at the co-op, when I saw him, I said, I know you from somewhere, and he reminded me that he's a graduate of the Moving Image Archiving and Preservation program at NYU, and that he was part of a class that came to visit my studio in 2018. For the past 18 years, in fact, my studio has been an annual, what happened to the picture? Sarah? Yeah. For the past 18 years, my studio has been a field trip destination for hundreds of students in what's called the MIAP program. They treat my studio as a kind of laboratory for exploring the myriad challenges associated with gathering, collecting, organizing, and preserving archival elements across a wide range of media, physical, analog, digital, and everything in between. I'd like to illustrate all of this to you by showing you a clip from a film that I made in 2006 called Wide Awake. It's a film about my insomnia. Speaking of which, this would be a much better presentation on my part if it was in the evening. I'm definitely not a morning person. This clip that I'm about to show you is called The Studio. It's part of the film that I refer to as the studio tour, although some people call it the coffee experiment, because it's fueled by a very strong cup of coffee that was brewed for me, specially brewed for me, by someone who knew that I hadn't had a cup of coffee in more than 30 years. So, Sarah, please, let's do the studio tour.
It's official. I have now had my first cup of coffee in more than 31 years. Feeling quite active, activated, I should say. Now, are we in a wide shot now? No? Head and shoulder shot? Can we make it a wide shot? Can we make it a wide shot? What do we have to do to make it a wide shot? Keep rolling while the camera's resetting positions. Think back to what I looked like this morning without coffee. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. This is what I look like with coffee. We have a wide shot now? Okay. Now, while I have this moment and while I have the energy, you see these boxes behind me? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, the colors of the spectrum. The red boxes, they are black and white film. Old newsreels, educational films, things I got from the National Archives. The orange boxes are sound effects. Footsteps on brush, cement, dirt, grass, gravel, ground, interior, snow, water. The yellow is color film. Filmmakers actually give me their outs because they know that I'll store them and put them in the archive. The green boxes are American family home movies from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. All anonymous. In a way, sometimes I think of this as sort of an orphanage for lost home movies. This is some rare footage from the old Negro baseball leagues. Looks like she's been drinking some coffee too. The blue boxes contain my own family home movies, mostly stuff my father shot when I was a kid. Everything else is stuff I've shot ever since. The violet boxes, remember Roy G. Biv, the violet, these are photographs that I've collected all over the world. Again, anonymous. Pick a box, any box. Okay, this one. Can you see here? These are portraits. I know none of these people. If you recognize anyone in this box, let me know. I'll give them back their picture. The black boxes contain photographs I've been cutting out of the newspaper. The history of the world over the last 25 years is somewhere in these boxes. Did I mention everything's alphabetical? Naturally. When you surround yourself with so much stuff, you have to be extremely organized. I need an image, I know where it is. I need a sound. That's the whole point, to be able to act at the speed of thought. Every time I get an idea, I write it down on a small piece of paper. After I act on it, I put it on one of these things you see in Chinese restaurants. By the way, I am really buzzing right now. Okay, this shelf right here, these are all found family photo albums, orphan family photo albums. I mean, I don't even understand how they come to be. Can you imagine if your family photo album somehow ended up at a garage sale or a flea market? Got lost somehow? Oops, that's the phone. The phone's ringing during the coffee experiment. Say something to the film, okay? Hold on, go.
Did you fall asleep last night?
Can't really talk because I'm in the middle of this. That was my mother. This is a collection of glass negatives. People drink coffee every day, I can't even imagine. This cabinet right here contains every photograph from my entire life. My mother is pregnant with me here, my sister's born here, it's our entire family, all the way through my life up to here. My mother's side of the family, my father's side of the family, my father's army pictures, parents' wedding pictures. For both sides of my family, I am the keeper of the memory. I don't think anyone really knows. I don't think anyone really cares. Okay. I also collect objects. Different objects. Here's a drawer called spheres, pyramids, alphabet, bells. Here's a drawer called flip books. Time. This is one of my favorite things in the whole world. Miniature watch parts. This is a sound sculpture I once made called Audiophile. Here's a drawer called No Trespassing.
I stopped. Microphone? Did I turn it off? I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. Yeah, I stopped it at Audiophile because you have a chance to see it upstairs. You don't need me to show it to you. Okay. Speaking of upstairs, let me talk a little bit about the exhibition, Think Like a Filmmaker. As someone who's been making films since the age of 17, I had accumulated all sorts of film equipment, supplies, materials, all of which, eventually I put in boxes and stored in my basement. I think there are like 20 large boxes of stuff. And to be honest with you, I forgot about them, as happens, until COVID. When amidst the isolation and the open-ended twilight zone we all entered, I went down to my basement and began looking around, and I came upon all these boxes, dusty boxes, filled with reels, films, cores, splicers, synchronizers, all that stuff. And I brought them upstairs, one at a time, and I began to open them slowly. And I remember questioning myself when I saw the boxes, and I said to myself, why are you saving all this stuff? What do you have in mind, you know? And I kept coming upon, I mean, listen, I'm a collector. I don't think I'm at the level of hoarder. Some of you might disagree. That's okay. But why are we saving this stuff? And I guess the answer I came up with was that I thought that I might do something with them one day, okay? Of course, I knew that day was unlikely to ever arrive, and that it was much more likely that a day would come when my collection of all the 60mm filmmaking tools and materials would be casually dismissed as one of my many obsessions, as it was carried out to the dumpster or prepped for sale on eBay, right? But for me, the COVID years became a time to take inventory of many of the objects, ideas, inklings, intuitions, and wishful thoughts I put off avoided, set aside, or never figured out. I don't know, like you maybe, waiting for inspiration, for clarity, or that elusive right time to finally get around to doing something with it or with them. Waiting for a rainy day. And you know what? COVID became my rainy day. It allowed me the time and the psychic space to reflect on all that stuff, all that old film material, and those tools, which eventually led me to the body of work I call Think Like a Filmmaker. Let me talk just real quickly about the title. Throughout the course of working with all these objects and physical materials, I wrote those 4 words on an index card, Think Like a Filmmaker, and I put it on a shelf in front of me so I would see it every day. It was a way of challenging myself. It was a way of refocusing myself. It was a way of reminding myself, especially when I didn't quite know what to do. Think like a filmmaker. What? Reminding myself that what I needed to do was to approach these materials, these tools, these machines, with a transformative mindset based on a few of the essential psychological, conceptual, and perceptual foundations that have shaped my relationship to cinema for decades, and to the idea of cinematic. What is cinematic? How can I make these cinematic? How can I activate them cinematically? And in other words, how can I bring these objects into a relationship to time, to space, to structure, to storytelling, materiality, playfulness, and joy? I also kept that as a title for the work, as a helpful message to the viewer, to the participant, to you, as something for you to hold on to as you look at the work. It's a kind of short answer, an instant short answer if when you walk up to something on the wall or something that you see and you say, what's that about? Why is he doing that? Think like a filmmaker, okay? In the back of my mind throughout the course of making the work, I was also thinking about my son Eli. He's 20 years old. Truth is, Eli saw me make a lot of this stuff, but if it wasn't for me, he, his friends, frankly, his entire generation, they know nothing about motion pictures. They don't know about metal film reels. They don't know about sprocket holes. They don't know about frame lines, the sound of projectors, what splicers do, what rewinds do. They have no idea what the persistence of vision is. They know none of that. And also, to be honest, they don't know anything about touching the things you work with or making things with your hands. And so this was a way of maybe one day bringing that generation back around to understanding the tradition, the technology. And with that in mind, I gave all of the works titles that are referent to the cinematic lexicon, phrases that come from the glossary of filmmaking and film history. And maybe if Eli and his generation see these works and see the titles and reflect on them, they'll be intrigued enough to learn more about this ancient foreign language we call filmmaking. Finally, Think Like a Filmmaker has a twin sibling. That is to say, it was made at the same time with another work of mine, and they both share the same DNA. And if you bear with me, I just have a brief video to show you, and I'll talk over it. Sarah, this is a good time to show the parts and labor clip. This is a work I made called Parts and Labor. It's 22 feet long, 16.5 inches high, and 5 inches deep in various places. That's what it looks like. It has electrical elements, sound, a video camera, various lights, and projections. It's it's going to start soon. Here we go. Parts and Labor is a scroll. It's a storyboard, a matrix. It's a mural. One of the things I also did during COVID is I took things apart. I like taking things apart. And I created an archive of parts, machine parts, old technology. It's an archive, and it's a conversation between old and new technologies. It's also a kind of movie. As you move across parts and labor from left to right, you'll encounter transitional logics, editorial logics, storytelling logics, arcs of history, a dance between form and content, threads of cinematic thinking, a compressed history of technology, there are clocks in there. There are sound. There should be sound in this, Sarah. Coming out of that speaker right there. The sound. Spitting things. That's a laser beam. Oh, anyway, it's okay. It's okay. Sound there is better than me. But I had a final line, which is that really what Parts and Labor and Think Like a Filmmaker share is a love of cinema.
We ran a little late, so I'm going to call our panelists back here and to see if you have any question, and then if they run out of time, we can continue upstairs talking. And we'll have mics, and we'll take some questions.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, you can ask questions, of course.
Okay.
I see your question.
This is very specific question about the Walter Lantz cartoon. So
I hope I can answer it.
I'm sure you can. I was interested in the nitrate material.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering if you could talk. I mean, we all know about the flammability question, but what is the actual quality like when you're working with nitrate as a archival material?
It's extraordinary. I mean, plain and simple, nitrate elements have a quality to them it's very, very unique. It's beautiful. The depth of color, the retention of color. I think that's the thing that's so extraordinary is when we scan these elements, the color is still there and it's beautiful. So it's, we love working with nitrate, but it's very, very complicated to work with nitrate. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
There's silver.
There's
silver.
The silver
in
quality.
The mixture.
Yeah.
We open up cans sometimes and they're jelly. They just, you never know. I mean, it'll go like 10 years earlier, the last time you preserved it or looked at it, it was perfect. And no matter what you do.
So you've come across nitrate in your own collection?
Oh yeah. But yeah, it is extraordinary, just pictorially. Like every photograph is like a 35 millimeter photograph from 1920.
This is why it's so important to preserve the nitrate elements digitally, because we don't know how long they're going to last. It's really critical.
A question right here.
Yes.
Yeah.
David, I wondered if you said that the Filmmakers Cooperative.
Hold on for the mic so that everybody can hear.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, David. You said that the Filmmakers Cooperative accepted all whatever people came by.
Right.
Is that still the case? And do you get a lot, or
Well,
because they can
so
put
I'm
it
on the board. I should just say I'm on the board of directors. I'm not the staff. I don't know if Robert is here. I think Robert was going to be here. But yeah, I mean, I think that's still the policy.
I wonder if people are still bringing them by, or if they're putting them on TikTok instead.
Well, I think I think a lot of people are just putting them out on video.
Yeah.
So
No, there's just still a large need for 16mm rentals, and they're part of that. Filmmakers Co-op.
right.
Yeah.
But there's not like an overwhelming number of artists who. I mean, there are filmmakers who still work in 16. Like there is a real interest now, like in recent years, for analog film, for celluloid film. You know, so audiences like to see film prints, and a lot of young artists are working in film. So there's sort of a return to that.
No question here.
Thanks. It's wonderful that the projects that you've all been working on feel as if they've been supported and you've been able to find funding. And some of us have been working with the Academy Film Archive, among other groups, and you all know what has just happened there. So, and I'm sure many of you have collaborated with them also, both individually, as Alan has, and institutionally. What can you say about that? Because we are, people don't know what will come of it. Many people their jobs have been eliminated at the Academy Film Archive, and it's not clear yet what's going to happen. So any insights you may have are extremely useful to hear about.
Wants to wade into this?
I can't wait, but just to contextualize, the Academy Film Archive just let go a big number of their employees that were really crucial to the preservation and restoration of the collections. So it has been a little bit of a shock.
There's been an uproar among people who love, like Alan, love cinema. So, as I think you all know, there's four main large archives in this country: the Library of Congress, Museum of Modern Art, Eastman House, and the Academy Film Archive. And so the fact that the Academy is apparently in doing some sort of down whatever what you would call it, restructuring. It's like the euphemism for what they're doing. There's something going on there. And as one curator I talked to yesterday said, they don't appear to love their own history of film. I mean, so it's very upsetting. So there's a petition going around, which probably we can all join and sign. A lot of people are signing a petition to have these people who have, many, many years of experience. The head of the archive has like around 30 years of experience there. So it was really stunning, because I'm sure that whatever the amount of money that's being saved is minimal compared to what the Academy spends, and it's such an important history. Awesome. So I'm sure we haven't heard the end of this story.
The value of these long-term people that have worked there, you cannot calculate it. My employees some of them have been with me for 30 years, and they know everything. So to do this on the level of the Academy is just a total catastrophe, because Pete, you can't bring in new people that are going to know every film, every can has a story. So it's a really horrible thing.
Yeah, it's great to have something else to be angry about these days. I mean, the day the layoffs were announced, there was also an announcement that the Academy just got like a Quentin Tarantino script from one of its movies,
fiction,
which is great. But there's an emphasis with the museum now, which is its own money pit, I guess, to collect these artifacts that have sort of a tourist appeal. But the films themselves are what's the most important.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
history. Yeah.
And being where it is in the heart of Hollywood, the Academy is where a lot of the filmmakers in town just give their prints. You know, it just seems like, they don't keep it in the garage; they donate them, so entire collections are housed there.
I mean, it's great.
Important.
It's great that the studios now are archiving and restoring their own films. That wasn't always the case. I mean, Paramount famously. Yes.
Paramount sold their library prior to 1950 in 1958 to Universal, so the film library that was previously owned by Paramount. So we restore those films too. They're part of our archive. We restore them, but this is the kind of thing, the deals that get made, and they were sold to the television group of Universal at the time, which was MCA. So. Libraries are always, changing hands is kind of part of the story of Hollywood too.
Are the new sources then coming from the private sector? Is that what's happening? Funding for this?
Are the new sources coming from the private sector? That's what's happening.
Well, now there's value. Now the studios, there's
Absolutely.
many more opportunities or ways to make this material.
I know this is going to be a bad word probably in this audience. Well, I'm going to talk about streaming. Okay. And streaming, honestly, even though it's not the theatrical experience, it does provide the opportunity for us to be able to do this. So it goes hand in hand with what we do.
David, I have a question. You're talking about storage. As you well know, the studios, even though Warner Brothers sold to Metro, all of the films are stored in Pennsylvania, in the middle of the country, and I can remember many days when you were waiting for a print, and would it come on time so you could have a screening? And I think that's still true, and I think it's important to let the audience understand that those who have kept large collections, none of them keep them on site as to where you are. You don't keep yours at Universal?
We do.
All
Actually, we do. Not all of them, but we have a geographic separation policy. So there's a print that's going to play tomorrow, The Wild Party by Dorothy Arzner. That is stored in our library on the Universal lot. So it depends on what the element is.
You have another print somewhere else?
I don't know, actually. That's a good question. But we're restoring that film right now, so it's undergoing a restoration.
Where do you store it? Like you get this library from Kent State. Like where do you?
Well, as a small, very small company, we have several storage vaults that are climate controlled, 3, and we do keep a lot in-house, but we also have scanners and things like that. So we digitize everything. And the digitizations are backed up in different places. Yes. So if, God forbid, there was ever a fire and we lost the acetate, we would have the 4K scans, in redundancy in different places. It's the most you could do for us. I mean, and we're talking about film. When we get to videotape, talk about a nightmare. Yeah. I mean, videotape, thin, paper-thin, magnetic tape. At least acetate film is thick. It's relatively durable. You could still show a 100-year-old film on a projector if it's in decent shape. Videotape, you try to play a 50-year-old 2-inch video. Good luck. And this is going to be a nightmare that no one is even addressing yet, because the last 50, 70 years is on videotape.
There was a question behind there.
Yes. To follow up on what you just mentioned, fast forward 50 or 75 years, and there's a discovery of movies on digital media found in that barn. What's the expectation that, let's say, a drive is recoverable or a chip is recoverable as opposed to film, which seems to be pretty has quite some longevity. And the other question is AI being used to actually try to identify elements or people in some of these older films?
At the beginning of that, but I do know that some of the AI tools are being incorporated, but also on the level that I am, where I supply footage to other people's projects, a lot of the researchers are up in arms because there are programs now where all right, instead of calling me for a shot of Washington, D.C. in 1939, they're creating it. They're creating it out of digital media. And we're all very frightened about that. This is the next thing, because soon there's going to be a program you as an independent filmmaker will be able to buy that can just give you almost anything. That's around the corner, and it'll be fake. They'll be putting in the media of old films like mine and Universal's, whatever, and creating their entire new reality that filmmakers will be using. Why? Because they could buy the program for $500 instead of paying $30 a second to license a clip. So this is not even around the corner. It's down at the end of the block.
We have a question from Barbara.
First of all,
the mic.
Do I have to take this? Thank you all for bringing us different pieces of what this is like, and now Alan can make a film think like an archivist. I think you're ready to do that. Cassandra, this is a quick question for you. Have you preserved The Man Who Laughs?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I got.
Yes. Any other question? Then I suggest we go upstairs and continue any conversation you might have.